Welcome to our next installment in the I Am sayings of Jesus as we continue to trace through John's Gospel those self-revelations, how Jesus describes himself and the particular analogies and metaphors that he uses to tell us about his true identity. We come now to the 10th chapter of John, and these next two, I am the door of the sheep, or the sheep gate in some translations, and I am the good shepherd, are really used in the same context. They're two different statements, but they come in the same exact context. We'll be looking at them separately. But reminding ourselves where we've been, he first started to talk about I am the bread of life in John chapter 6, and then he went on to make that argument afterwards about the certain work that he would perform as the bread of life, as the one who gives true bread, spiritual bread, eternal bread to his people, and that sure work that the Father has sent him to accomplish, that he will in fact accomplish. And then he went on in John chapter 8 to talk about I'm the light of the world. And after that, then he went on to make that very, I think, most important statement in John's Gospel, in John chapter 8, at the end there, where he says, before Abraham was, I am, the great I am that we first see there in that self-revelation to Moses, the eternal one. And Jesus, if you'll remember, claims equality with God on that, takes that title upon himself, and in fact we see that the Jews realize what he's saying, and they pick up stones to throw at him. That light of the world, of course, that light that Revelation talks about, that will close in all eternity in, no need of the sun or the moon, because Jesus is the light of the world there with us, which then led, of course, also into John chapter 9, ironically, where Jesus heals a blind man. And there's a big controversy with the leaders about that, about who's really blind. Jesus using physical blindness to talk about the spiritual blindness of all fallen men. And of course, I'll let you read John chapter 9 to yourself. Now we come here to John 10. Let me read through the first 10 verses. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hears his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep will follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus again said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Well, Jesus here employs a metaphor, an analogy that would have been easily understood at the time. Like any of us preachers, we struggle always to find analogies and metaphors that are that all people can relate to. And of course, the more diverse, and as time goes on, the more diverse of culture and people that there are, that becomes almost near impossible. Peter and I often employ baseball analogies or sports analogies. And of course, if you're a sports fan, those work very well. But there's always that small number that don't get it. This one here is, and especially at the time, a much better use of an analogy in that agrarian society where everybody was involved in growing of food and livestock and all these common things, much more a lack of diversity of trades and work. Everybody would have known about a sheepfold, but not so much in our day. Sheepfold is really, think of it as a pen, a safe haven that's walled off, sometimes by fence, most commonly at that time by a low rock wall, that surrounded a very large area with one opening. They would even employ, not having barbed wire or anything like that at the time, they would employ dried briars, thorns like that could really do some damage to keep people from going in and over, and also keeping other animals and predators from discouraging them from going in and out as well. So this sheepfold, Jesus now says, I am the door. Some translations, as I said, sheep gate. It's that access point, that singular access point into the sheepfold. And there would be a gatekeeper, if you will, a security officer who his job, this was his sheepfold, and he would allow shepherds to bring their sheep in so that they could stay overnight and rest and be secure in that. And then they would go and get them in the morning. And Jesus employs that whole analogy, that picture, if you will, in this first part of this I am saying, I am the door, or I am the sheep gate. He's employing the access point to reveal something of who he is. And simply stated, what he's saying is, I am the only access point. I am the only legitimate access point to the sheep. And he's really employing this in a sense between the people of God and God the Father. This relationship of the chief shepherd, if you will, which he'll employ that in a different sense here in just a little while. But taking himself not yet in that shepherd role, but that access point, he's saying that I am the true access point between God and to be one of God's people, between God and his sheep. There is a exclusive claim here. And of course, one of the difficult things that a modern world, although I think even the ancient world struggled with this, any kind of diverse culture where there's a lot of man-made religion and opinions about life and its existence and its origins and its direction. One of the difficult things about Christianity is the exclusive claims that Jesus constantly makes. It's hard now for people to accept. It was hard then for people to hear. But that's exactly what Jesus is saying. If you want to be of the sheep of the one true God, the only access point to that secure place, and the only shepherd, the only person that has true protective rights and ownership over the sheep, is God the Father's one and only Son, Jesus. And so in this first part, he's saying, I'm the access point. If you want to be one of God's people, the only access to those true sheep is through Jesus. And of course, then the other part of the other side of the coin, if you will, is that for the sheep to really have access and to think that there is any access to the Father, the owner of the sheep, through any other means is not legitimate. Jesus is saying, I'm it. And he goes on to talk about the fact that this relationship that the sheep have to the Father, to the great shepherd, is a very personal one. The sheep hear his voice, he says. They listen to his voice. They will not follow the voice of a stranger because they do not know that voice. There's always voices out there saying, come follow me. One of the difficult things is to analyze what these false teachers, these false shepherds, these thieves and robbers, what is it that they're employing the sheep to do? They're usually employing the sheep to try and find their own way, to make access to God through means of their own control and their own efforts. He calls all those who came before him thieves and robbers. Now, he certainly must have been thinking about the pretended messiahs. There were those who came along prior to Jesus' time claiming to be the Messiah. But I think he had a broader picture in mind. He is all throughout here, as we'll see as we look next time in the Good Shepherd. He's getting on to even the leaders of Israel about what they were really doing for the sheep, what their interest in the sheep really was. And he really pulls no punches here. But he says, my sheep will always know my voice. Remember back in John chapter 6 and that follow-up to I am the bread of life. And remember in that latter part of John chapter 6, I introduced that second part of the bread of life by talking about Jesus' certain work. Did Jesus make salvation just possible, or did he make it certain? And here again, he's saying this certain word, my sheep, the ones who are truly my sheep, will always hear my voice. They will not heed the voice of a stranger. I think of a story that one of my professors related, a friend of his who was a missionary, and a mission to some native people of a particular land. And they had gone into town, which was not very usual for them. They were administering to a people that were way out in the unsettled, some people would say uncivilized areas. But on this particular time, one of the other leaders that they had befriended had gone into this town, and there was a preacher from a false religion, a cult religion. I will withhold the name of that cult to protect the guilty. But he had his Bible open, and of course this new convert from this native saw the Bible open, and he was teaching, and he was teaching rather poorly. He was teaching rather poorly in the sense of really telling the truth. He was preaching a man-centered, do your best, you just need to try harder, those sorts of things, but much more blatant than that. And the missionary related that he was worried the whole time that this person might be taken in by that false gospel, and prayed that God would close his ears. Interestingly enough, the native didn't listen very long before he walked away and came and joined him, and they continued on their journey. And he said, well, the missionary asked the native, what did you think of the message? And he said, I don't know, I listened for a little bit, but it didn't sound right to me. And then all I heard internally was a voice, liar, liar, liar. Jesus' sheep will always know his voice. The voice of the gospel that always promotes him. Doesn't promote us. Doesn't promote our ability. Doesn't promote our efforts. But it promotes Christ and it elevates him. Jesus closes this section by once again using, just as he opened in verse 1, that statement, truly, truly, true truth, absolute truth, I would argue, is what's being held here. I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The only means to really be in that secure stance, the secure stance that even seasoned believers find difficulty in remaining in that land of security, because they turn their eyes onto something else. They turn their eyes onto themselves. They turn their eyes into their failures and their struggles. Jesus says the way to remain in that pasture, that salvation, that eternal bliss, that rest, is to know that he is the door. He is the access point. If you've trusted in him, you have trusted in the legitimate access point, and the only one that God will ever accept, and the one that God will securely keep us in by his Son, Jesus Christ, who is the door to the sheep pen. We'll see you next time for I Am the Good Shepherd.